Jack Kerouac's The Dharma Bombs. Chapter 10. I rousted about and got a lot of little pieces of wood to make kindling for the fire, and then I went round, gathering bigger pieces, and finally I was hunting out huge logs, easy to find all over the place. We had a fire that Morley must have seen from 5 miles away, except we were way up beyond the cliff face, cut off from his view. It cast mighty blasts of heat against our cliff. The cliff absorbed it and threw it back. We were in a hot room, except that the ends of our noses were nippy from sticking them out of that area to get firewood and water. Jaffe put the bulgur in the pot with water and started it boiling and stirring it around, and meanwhile busied himself with the mixings for the chocolate pudding, and started boiling that in a separate, smaller pot out of my knapsack. He also brewed a fresh pot of tea. Then he whipped out his double set of chopsticks, and pretty soon we had our supper ready and laughed over it. It was the most delicious supper of all time. Up out of the orange glow of our fire, you could see immense systems of uncountable stars, either as individual blazers, or in low Venus droppers, or vast Milky Ways, incommensurate with human understanding. All cold, blue, silver, but our food and our fire was pink and goodies. And true to what Jaffe had predicted, I had absolutely not a jot of appetite for alcohol. I'd forgotten all about it. The altitude was too high, the exercise too heavy, the air too brisk. The air itself was enough to get you as drunk as drunk. It was a tremendous supper. Food is always better eaten in doleful little pinchfuls off the ends of chopsticks. No gobbling. The reason why Darwin's law of survival applies best to China. If you don't know how to handle a chopstick and stick it in that family pot with the best of him, you'll starve. I ended up flupping it all up with my forefinger anyhow. Supper done, Jaffe assiduously got to scraping the pots with a wire scraper and got me to bring water, which I did, dipping a leftover can from other campers into the fire pool of stars, and came back with a snowball to boot, and Jaffe washed the dishes in pre-boiled water. Usually, I don't wash my dishes. I just wrap 'em up in my blue bandana, 'cause it really doesn't matter, though they don't appreciate this little bit of wisdom in the horse soap building Thar on Madison Avenue. What you call it? That English firm. Erber and Erber. What all damn hell and upside down boy, I'll be as tight as a Dick's hatband if I don't feel like taking out my star map and seeing what the lay of the pack is tonight. That Hound's pack up there, more unaccountable than all your favorite Sir Rangami Suttries, boy. So he whips out his star map and turns it around a little and adjusts and looks and says, "It's exactly 8:48 p.m. How do you know? Sirius wouldn't be where Sirius is if it wasn't 8:48 p.m. You know what I like about you, Ray? You've woke me up to the true language of this country, which is the language of the working men. Railroad men, loggers. Do you ever hear them guys talk? I sure did. I had a guy, an oil rig driver, truck, picked me up in Houston, Texas one night, round about midnight, after some little faggot who owned some motel courts, called, of all things, and rather appropriately, my dear, dandy courts, had left me off and said, if you can't get a ride, come on in sleep on my floor. So I wait about an hour in the empty road, and here comes this rig, and it's driven by a Cherokee. He said he was, but his name was Johnson, or Alley Reynolds, or some damn thing. And as my talk starting in with a speech like, well, boy, I left my mammy's cabin before you knew the smell of the river, and came west to drive myself mad in the East Texas oil field, and all kinds of rhythmic talk, and with every bang of rhythm he'd ram at his clutch and his various gears and pop up the truck and had her roaring down the road about 70 miles an hour with momentum only when the story got rolling with him. Magnificent. That's what I call poetry. That's what I mean. You ought to hear old Barney Byers talk up that talk in the Skagit country. Ray, you gotta go up there. Okay, I will. Jaffe, kneeling there, studying his star map, leaning forward slightly to peek up through the overhanging gnarled old rock country trees, with his goatee and all, looked with that mighty graw-faced rock behind him exactly like a vision I had of old Zen masters of China out in the wilderness. He was leaning forward on his knees, upward looking, as if with a holy sutra in his hands. Pretty soon he went to the snow bank and brought back the chocolate pudding, which was now ice cold and absolutely delicious beyond words. We ate it all up. Maybe we ought to leave some for Morley. It won't keep. It'll melt in the morning sun. As the fire stopped roaring and just got to be red coals, but big ones 6 feet long, the night interposed its icy crystal feel more and more, but with the smell of smoking logs. It was as delicious as chocolate pudding. For a while I went on a little walk by myself, out by the shallow iced creek, and sat meditating against a stump of dirt, and the huge mountain walls on both sides of our valley were silent masses. Too cold to do this more than a minute. As I came back, our orange fire casting its glow on the big rock, and Jaffe kneeling and peering up at the sky, and all of it 10,000 feet above the gnashing world, was a picture of peace and good sense. There was another aspect of Jaffe that amazed me, his tremendous and tender sense of charity. He was always giving thanks, always practicing what the Buddhists called the paramita of dana, the perfection of charity. Now, when I came back and sat down by the fire, he said, well, Smith, it's about time you owned a set of juju beads. You can have these. And he handed me the brown wood beads run together over a strong string, with the string, black and shiny, coming out at the large bead at the end in a pretty loop. Oh, you can't give me something like this. These things come from Japan, don't they? I've got another set of black ones, Smith. That prayer you gave me tonight is worth the set of juju beads, and you can have it anyway. A few minutes later, he cleaned out the rest of the chocolate pudding and made sure that I got most of it. Then, when he laid boughs over the rock of our clearing, and the poncho over that, he made sure his sleeping bag was farther away from the fire than mine, so I would sure to be warm. He was always practicing charity. In fact, he taught me, and a week later, I was giving him nice new undershirts I'd discovered in the Goodwill store. He'd turn right around and make me a gift of a plastic container to keep food in. For a joke, I'd give him a gift of huge flour from Elva's yard. Solemnly, a day later, he'd bring me a little bouquet of flowers picked in the street plots of Berkeley. And you can keep the sneakers, too, he said. I've got another pair, older than those, but just as good. I can't be taking all your things. Smith, you don't realize it's a privilege to practice giving presents to others. The way he did it was charming. There was nothing glittery and Christmassy about it, but almost sad, and sometimes his gifts were old beat-up things that they had the charm of usefulness and sadness of his giving. We rolled into our sleeping bags. It was freezing cold now, about 11 o'clock, and talked a while more before one of us just didn't answer from the pillow, and pretty soon we were asleep. While he snored, I woke up and just lay flat back with my eyes to the stars, and thank God I'd come on this mountain climb. My legs felt better, my whole body felt strong. The crack of the dying logs was like Jaffe making little comments on my happiness. I looked at him. His head was buried way under inside his duck-down bag. His little huddled form was the only thing I could see for miles of darkness that was so packed and concentrated with eager desire to be good. I thought, what a strange thing is man. Like in the Bible it says, who knoweth the spirit of man that looketh upward? This poor kid, 10 years younger than I am, is making me look like a fool for getting all the ideals and joys I knew before in my recent years of drinking and disappointment. What does he care if he hasn't got any money? He doesn't need any money. All he needs is his rucksack with those little plastic bags of dried food and a good pair of shoes, and off he goes and enjoys the privileges of a millionaire in surroundings like this. And what gouty millionaire could get up this rock anyhow? It took us all day to climb, and I promised myself that I would begin a new life, all over the West, and the mountains in the East, and the desert. I'll tramp with a rucksack and make it the pure way. I went to sleep after burying my nose under the sleeping bag, and woke up around dawn shivering. The ground cold had seeped through the poncho and through the bag, and my ribs were up against a damper damp than the damp of a cold bed. My breath was coming out in steams. I rolled over to the other ribs and slept more. My dreams were pure cold dreams like ice water. Happy dreams. No nightmares. When I woke up again and the sunlight was a pristine orange pouring through the crags to the east and down through our fragrant pine boughs, I felt like I did when I was a boy, and it was time to get up and go play all day, Saturday in overalls. Jaffe was already up singing and blowing on his hands at a small fire. White frost was on the ground. He rushed out away and yelled out, "Yodelay-hee!" And by God, we heard it come right back at us from Morley, closer than the night before. He's on his way now. Wake up, Smith, and have a hot cup of tea. Do you good. I got up and fished my sneakers out of the sleeping bag, where they'd been kept warm all night, and put them on, and put on my beret, and jumped up and ran a few blocks in the grass. The shallow creek was iced over, except in the middle, where a rill of gurgles rolled like tinkly, tinkly. I fell down on my belly and took a deep drink, wetting my face. There's no feeling in the world like washing your face in cold water on a mountain morning. Then I went back, and Jaffe was heating up the remains of last night's supper, and it was still good. Then we went out on the edge of the cliff and hewed at Morley, and suddenly we could see him, a tiny figure 2 miles down the valley of boulders, moving like a little animate being in the immense void. "That little dot down there is our witty friend Morley," said Jaffe in his funny, resounding voice of a lumberjack. In about 2 hours, Morley was within talking distance of us and started right in talking as he negotiated the final boulders to where we were sitting in the now warm sun on a rock waiting. The Ladies' Aid Society says I should come up and see if you boys would like to have blue ribbons pinned on your shirts. They say there's plenty of pink lemonade left, and Lord Mountbatten is getting mighty impatient. You think they'll investigate the source of that recent trouble in the Mid-East, or appreciate coffee, or learn appreciate. Okay, there's a misprint here. It should be, or learn to appreciate coffee better. Two is missing from the text. I should think with a couple of literary gentlemen like you two, they should learn to mind their manners, and so on, for no reason at all. Yakking in the happy blue morning sky over rocks, with his slacking grin, sweating a little from the long morning's work. Well, Morley, you ready to climb Matterhorn? I'm ready, just as soon as I can change these wet socks. Chapter 11. At about noon, we started out, leaving our big packs at the camp where nobody was likely to be till next year anyway, and went up the Scree Valley with just some food and first aid kits. The valley was longer than it looked. In no time at all, it was 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and the sun was getting that latter, more golden look, and a wind was rising, and began to think, by gosh, how we ever gonna climb that mountain tonight? I put it to Jaffe, who said, you're right, we'll have to hurry. Why don't we just forget it and go on home? Aw, come on, Tiger. We'll make a run up that hill, and then we'll go home. The valley was long and long and long, and at the top end it got very steep, and I began to be a little afraid of falling down. The rocks were small, and it got slippery, and my ankles were in pain from yesterday's muscle strain anyway. But Morley kept walking and talking, and I noticed his tremendous endurance. Jaffe took his pants off so he could look just like an Indian. Stark naked, except for a jockstrap, and hiked almost a quarter mile ahead of us, sometimes waiting a while to give us time to catch up. Then went on, moving fast, wanting to climb the mountain today. Morley came second, about 50 yards ahead of me, all the way. I was in no hurry. Then, as it got later afternoon, I went faster and decided to pass Morley and join Jaffe. Now we were at about 11,000 feet, and it was cold, and there was a lot of snow, and to the east we could see immense snow-capped ranges and hooey levels of valley land below them. We were already practically on top of California. At one point, I had to scramble like the others on a narrow ledge around the butt of rock, and it really scared me. The fall was 100 feet, enough to break your neck, with another little ledge letting you bounce a minute preparatory to a nice goodbye 1,000-foot drop. The wind was whipping now, yet the whole afternoon, even more than the other, was filled with old premonitions or memories, as though I'd been there before, scrambling on these rocks, for other purposes more ancient, more serious, more simple. We finally got to the foot of Matterhorn, where there was a most beautiful small lake unknown to the eyes of most men in this world, seen by only a handful of mountain climbers, a small lake at 11,000 some odd feet, with snow on the edges of it, and beautiful flowers, and beautiful meadows, an alpine meadow, flat and dreamy, upon which I immediately threw myself and took my shoes off. Jaffe had been there a half hour when I made it, And it was cold now, and his clothes were on again. Morley came up behind us, smiling. We sat there, looking up at the imminent steep scree slope of the final crag of Matterhorn. That don't look much. We can do it, I said, glad now. No, Ray, that's more than it looks. Do you realize that's 1,000 feet more? That much? Unless we make a ramp up there, double time, we'll never make it down again to our camp before nightfall, and never make it down to the car at the lodge before tomorrow morning at midnight. Phew! I'm tired, said Morley. I don't think I'll try it. Well, that's right, I said. The whole purpose of mountain climbing to me isn't just to show off you can get to the top. It's getting out to this wild country. Well, I'm going to go, said Jaffe. Well, if you're going to go, I'm going with you. Morley? I don't think I can make it. I'll wait here. And that wind was strong, too strong. I felt that as soon as we'd be a few hundred feet up the slope, it might hamper our climbing. Jaffe took a small pack of peanuts and raisins and said, "This'll be our gasoline, boy. You ready, Ray, to make a double-time run?" Ready. What would I say to the boys in the place if I came all this way only to give up at the last minute? It's late, so let's hurry. Jaffe started up, walking very rapidly, and then even running sometimes where the climb had to be to the right or left along ridges of scree. Scree is long landslides of rocks and sand, very difficult to scramble through. Always little avalanches going on. At every few steps we took, it seemed we were going higher and higher on a terrifying elevator. I gulped when I turned around to look back and see all the state of California. It would seem stretching over in 3 directions under huge blue skies with frightening planetary space clouds and immense vistas of distant valleys and even plateaus, and for all I knew, whole Nevadas out there. It was terrifying to look down and see Morley, a dreaming spot, by the little lake waiting for us. Oh, why didn't I stay with old Henry? I thought. I now began to be afraid to go any higher from sheer fear of being too high. I began to be afraid of being blown away by the wind. All the nightmares I'd ever had about falling off mountains and precipitous buildings ran through my head in perfect clarity. Also, with every 20 steps we took upward, we both became completely exhausted. That's because of the high altitude now, Ray, said Jaffe, sitting beside me, panting. So have raisins and peanuts, and you'll see what kick it gives you. And each time it gave us such a tremendous kick, we both jumped up without a word and climbed another 20-30 steps, then sat down again, panting, sweating in the cold wind, high on top of the world, our noses sniffing like the noses of little boys playing late Saturday afternoon their final little games in winter. Now the wind began to howl, like the wind in movies about the Shroud of Tibet. The steepness began to be too much for me. I was afraid now to look back any more. I peeked. I couldn't even make out Morley by the tiny lake. "Hurry it up," yelled Jaffe from 100 feet ahead. "It's getting awfully late." I looked up to the peak. It was right there. I'd be there in 5 minutes. "Only a half hour to go," yelled Jaffe. I didn't believe it. In 5 minutes of scrambling angrily upward, I fell down and looked up, and it was still just as far away. What I didn't like about that peak top was that the clouds of all the world were blowing right through it like fog. "Wouldn't see anything up there anyway," I muttered. Oh, why did I ever let myself into this? Jaffe was way ahead of me now. He'd left the peanuts and raisins with me. It was with a kind of lonely solemnity. Now he had decided to rush to the top, if it killed him. He didn't sit down any more. Soon he was a whole football field 100 yards ahead of me, getting smaller. I looked back, and like Lot's wife, that did it. This is too high. I yelled to Jaffe in a panic. He didn't hear me. I raced a few more feet up and fell exhausted on my belly, slipping back just a little. This is too high, I yelled. I was really scared. Supposing I'd start to slip back for good. These screes might start sliding any time anyway. That damn mountain goat Jaffe, I could see him jumping through the foggy air up ahead from rock to rock, up, just the flash of his boot bottoms. How can I keep up with a maniac like that? But with nutty desperation, I followed him. Finally, I came to a kind of ledge where I could sit at a level angle instead of having to cling, not to slip, and I nudged my whole body inside the ledge just to hold me there tight, so the wind would not dislodge me. And I looked down and around, and I had it. I'm staying here, I yelled to Jaffe. Come on, Smith. Only another 5 minutes. I only got 100 feet to go. I'm staying right here. It's too high. He said nothing and went on. I saw him collapse and pant and get up and make his run again. I nudged myself closer into the ledge and closed my eyes and thought, oh, what a light this is. Why do we have to be born in the first place? And only so we can have our poor gentle flesh laid out to such impossible horrors as huge mountains and rock and empty space. And with horror, I remembered the famous Zen saying, when you get to the top of the mountain, keep climbing. The saying made my hair stand on end. It had been such cute poetry sitting on Alva's straw mats. Now it was enough to make my heart pound and my heart bleed for being born at all. In fact, when Jaffe gets to the top of that crag, he will keep climbing, the way the wind's blowing. Well, this old philosopher is staying right here, and I closed my eyes. Besides, I thought, rest and be kind. You don't have to prove anything. Suddenly, I heard a beautiful broken yodel of a strange musical and mystical intensity in the wind, and looked up, and it was Jaffe, standing on top of Matterhorn Peak, letting out his triumphant mountain-conquering, Buddha mountain-smashing song of joy. It was beautiful. It was funny, too, up here on the not-so-funny top of California, and in all that rushing fog. But I had to hand it to him. The guts, the endurance, the sweat, and now the crazy human singing, whipped cream on top of ice cream. I didn't have enough strength to answer his yodel. He ran around up there and went out of sight to investigate the little flap top of some kind, he said, that ran a few feet west and then dropped sheer back down maybe as far as I care to the sawdust floors of Virginia City. It was insane. I could hear him yelling at me, but I just nudged farther in my protective nook, trembling. I looked down at the small lake where Morley was lying on his back with a blade of grass in his mouth, and said out loud, now there's the karma of these 3 men here. Jaffe Ryder gets to his triumphant mountaintop and makes it. I almost make it and have to give up and huddle in a bloody cave. But the smartest of them all is that poet's poet lying down there with his knees crossed to the sky, chewing on a flower, dreaming by a gurgling plague. God damn it, they'll never get me up here again. Chapter 12. I really was amazed by the wisdom of Morley now. Him with all his goddamn pictures of snow-capped Swiss Alps, I thought. Then suddenly everything was just like jazz. It happened in one insane second or so. I looked up and saw Jaffe running down the mountain in huge 20-foot leaps, running, leaping, landing with great drive of his booted heels, bouncing 5 feet or so, running, then taking another long, crazy, yelling, yodeling sail down the sides of the world, and in that flash I realized it's impossible to fall off mountains, you fool, and with a yodel of my own I suddenly got up and began running down the mountain after him, doing exactly the same huge leaps, the same fantastic runs and jumps, and in the space of about 5 minutes I'd guessed Jaffy Ryder and I, in my sneakers, driving the heels of my sneakers right into sand, rock boulders. I didn't care any more. I was so anxious to get down out of there. Came leaping and yelling like mountain goats, or I'd say Chinese lunatics of 1,000 years ago, enough to raise the hair on the head of the meditating Morley by the lake, who said he looked up and saw us flying down and couldn't believe it. In fact, with one of my greatest leaps and loudest screams of joy, I came flying right down to the ledge of the lake and dug my sneakered heels into the mud and just fell, sitting there, glad. Jaffy was already taking his shoes off and pouring sand and pebbles out. It was great. I took off my sneakers and poured out a couple of buckets of lava dust and said, "Ah, Jaffy, you taught me the final lesson of them all. You can't fall off a mountain." And that's what they meant by the saying, "When you get to the top of the mountain, keep climbing, Smith." Damn it, that yodel of triumph of yours was the most beautiful thing I ever heard in my life. I wish I'd had a tape recorder to take it down. Those things aren't made to be heard by the people below, says Jaffy, dead serious. By God, you're right. All those sedentary bums sitting around on pillows hearing the cry of the triumphant mountain smasher. They don't deserve it. But when I looked up and saw you running down the mountain, I suddenly understood everything. Ah, a little Satori for Smith today, says Morley. What were you doing down here? Sleeping, mostly. Well, damn it, I didn't get to the top. Now I'm ashamed of myself, because now that I know how to come down a mountain, I know how to go up, and that I can't fall off, but now it's too late. We'll come back next summer, Ray, and climb it. Do you realize that this is the first time you've been mountain climbing, and you left old veteran Morley here behind you? Sure, said Morley. Do you think, Jaffy, they would assign Smith the title of Tiger for what he done today? Oh, sure, says Jaffy, and I really felt proud. I was a tiger. Well, damn it, I'll be a lion next time we get up here. Let's go, men. Now we've got a long way to go back down this scree to our camp and down the valley of boulders and then down that lake trail. Wow, I doubt if we can make it before pitch dark. It'll be mostly okay. Morley pointed to the sliver of moon in the pinkening, deepening blue sky. That ought to light us away. Let's go. We all got up and started back. Now, when I went around that ledge that had scared me, it was just fun and a lark. I just skipped and jumped and danced along, and I had really learned that you can't fall off a mountain. Whether you can fall off a mountain or not, I don't know, but I had learned that you can't. That was the way it struck me. It was a joy, though, to get down into the valley and lose sight of all that open sky space underneath everything. And finally, as it got graying 5 o'clock, about 100 yards from the other boys, and walking alone, to just pick my way singing and thinking along the little black cruds of a deer trail through the rocks. No call to think or look ahead or worry. Just follow the little balls of deer crud with your eyes cast down and enjoy life. At one point I looked and saw crazy Jaffy, who'd climbed for fun to the top of a snow slope and skied right down to the bottom, about 100 yards on his boots, and the final few yards on his back. yippying and glad. Not only that, but he'd taken off his pants again and wrapped them around his neck. This pants bit of his was simply, he said, for comfort, which is true. Besides, nobody around to see him anyway, though I figured that when he went mountain climbing with girls, it didn't make any difference to him. I could hear Morley talking to him in the great lonely valley. Even across the rocks, you could tell it was his voice. Finally, I followed my deer trail so assiduously I was by myself going along ridges and down across creek bottoms, completely out of sight of them, though I could hear them. But I trusted the instinct of my sweet little millennial deer, and true enough. Just as it was getting dark, their ancient trail took me right to the edges of the familiar shallow creek, where they stopped to drink for the last 5,000 years. And there was the glow of Jaffe's bonfire, making the side of the big rock orange and gay. The moon was bright high in the sky. Well, that moon's gonna save our ass. We got 8 miles to go down trail, boys. We ate a little and drank a lot of tea and arranged all our stuff. I had never had a happier moment in my life than those lonely moments coming down that little deer trace. And when we hiked off with our packs, I turned to take a final look up that way. It was dark now, hoping to see a few little deer. Nothing in sight, and I thanked everything up that way. It had been like when you're a little boy and have spent a whole day rambling along in the woods and fields, and on the dusk homeward walk you did it all with your eyes to the ground, scuffling, thinking, whistling, like little Indian boys must feel when they follow their striding fathers from Russian River to Shasta 200 years ago, like little Arab boys following their fathers' trails, the sing-song little joyful solitude, nose sniffing, like a little girl pulling her little brother home on the sled, and they're both singing little ditties of their imagination and making faces at the ground and just being themselves before they have to go in the kitchen and put on a straight face again for the world of seriousness. Yet, what could be more serious than to follow a deer trace to get to your water, I thought. We got to the cliff and started down the 5-mile valley of boulders in clear moonlight now. It was quite easy to dance down from boulder to boulder. The boulders were snow white, with patches of a deep black shadow. Everything was cleanly, whitely beautiful in the moonlight. Sometimes you could see the silver flash of the creek. Far down were the pines of the meadow park and the pool of the pond. At this point, my feet were unable to go on. I called Jaffe and apologized. I couldn't take any more jumps. There were blisters, not only on the bottoms, but on the sides of my feet, from there having been no protection all yesterday and today. So Jaffe swapped and let me wear his boots. With these big, lightweight, protective boots on, I knew I could go on fine. It was a great new feeling to be able to jump from rock to rock without having to feel the pain through the thin sneakers. On the other hand, for Jaffe, it was also a relief to be suddenly light-footed, and he enjoyed it. We made double time down in the valley, but every step was getting us bent. Now we were all really tired. With the heavy packs, it was difficult to control those thigh muscles that you need to go down a mountainside, which is sometimes harder than going up. And there were all those boulders to surmount, for sometimes we'd be walking in sand a while, and our path would be blocked by boulders, and we had to climb them and jump from one to the other. Then suddenly no more boulders, and we had to jump down to the sand. Then we'd be trapped in impassable thickets and had to go around them or try to crash through, and sometimes I'd get stuck in a thicket with my rucksack, standing there cursing in the impossible moonlight. None of us were talking. I was angry, too, because Jaffe and Morley were afraid to stop and rest. They said it was dangerous at this point to stop. What's the difference? The moon's shining. We can even sleep. No, we've got to get down to that car tonight. Well, let's stop a minute here. My legs can't take it. Okay, only a minute. But they never rested long enough to suit me, and it seemed to me they were getting hysterical. I even began to curse them, and at one point I even gave Jaffe hell. What's the sense of killing yourself like this? You call this fun? Phooey, your ideas are a crock, I added to myself. A little weariness will change a lot of things. Eternities of moonlight rock and thickets and boulders and ducks and that horrifying valley with the two rim walls, and finally it seemed we were almost out of there. But nope, not quite yet, and my legs screaming to stop, and me cursing and smashing at twigs and throwing myself on the ground to rest a minute. Come on, Ray. Everything comes to an end. In fact, I realized I had no guts anyway, which I've long known. But I have joy. When we got to the alpine meadow, I stretched out on my belly and drank water and enjoyed myself peacefully in silence, while they talked and worried about getting down the rest of the trail in time. Don't worry. It's a beautiful night. You've driven yourself too hard. Drink some water and lie down here for about 5, even 10 minutes. Everything takes care of itself. Now I was being the philosopher. In fact, Jaffe agreed with me, and we rested peacefully. That good long rest assured my bones I could make it down to the lake okay. It was beautiful going down the trail. The moonlight poured through thick foliage and made dapples on the backs of Morley and Jaffe as they walked in front of me. With our packs, we got into a good rhythmic walk and enjoying going hup, hup as we came to switchbacks and swiveled around, always down, down, the pleasant down-going, swinging rhythm trail, and that roaring creek was a beauty by moonlight. Those flashes of flying moon water and that snow-white foam, those black as pitch trees, regular elfin paradises of shadow and moon. The air began to get warmer and nicer, and in fact, I thought I could begin to smell people again. We could smell the nice raunchy tide smell of the lake water, and flowers, and softer dust of down below. Everything up there had smelled of ice and snow and heartless spine rock. Here there was the smell of sun-heated wood, sunny dust resting in the moonlight, lake mud, flowers, straw, all those good things of the earth. The trail was fun coming down, and yet at one point I was as tired as ever, more than in the endless valley of boulders. But you could see the lake lodge down below now, a sweet little lamp of light, and so it didn't matter. Morley and Jaffe were talking a blue streak, and all we had to do was roll on down to the car. In fact, suddenly, as in a happy dream, with the suddenness of waking up from an endless nightmare, and it's all over, we were striding across the road, and there were houses, and there were automobiles parked under trees, and Morley's car was sitting right there. From what I can tell, by feeling this air, said Morley, leaning on the car, as we slung our packs to the ground, it mustn't have froze at all last night. I went back and drained the crankcase for nothing. Well, maybe it did freeze. Morley went over and got motor oil at the lodge store, and they told him it hadn't been freezing at all, but one of the warmest nights of the year. All that mad trouble for nothing, I said. But we didn't care. We were famished. I said, let's go to the Bridgeport and go in one of those lunch carts there, boy, and eat hamburg and potatoes and hot coffee. We drove down the lakeside dirt road in the moonlight, stopped at the inn where Morley returned the blankets, and drove on into the little town and parked on the highway. Poor Jaffy, it was here finally I found out his Achilles heel. This little tough guy, who wasn't afraid of anything and could ramble around mountains for weeks along and run down mountains, was afraid of going into a restaurant because the people in it were too well dressed. Morley and I laughed and said, what's the difference? We'll just go in and eat. But Jaffy thought the place I chose looked too bourgeois and insisted on going to a more working man looking restaurant across the highway. We went in there, and it was a desultory place with lazy waitresses letting us sit there 5 minutes without even bringing a menu. I got mad and said, let's go to that other place. What are you afraid of, Jaffy? What's the difference? You may know all about mountains, but I know about where to eat. In fact, we got a little miffed at each other, and I felt bad. But he came to the other place, which was the better restaurant of the two, with a bar on one side, many hunters drinking in the dim cocktail lounge light, and the restaurant itself, a long counter and a lot of tables, with whole gay families eating from a very considerable selection. The menu was huge and good, mountain trout, and everything. Jaffy, I found, was also afraid of spending 10 cents more for a good dinner. I went to the bar and bought a glass of port and brought it to our stool seats at the counter. Jaffy, you sure you can do that? And I kidded Jaffy a while. He felt better now. That's what the trouble with you, Jaffy. That's what's the trouble with you, Jaffy. You're just an old anarchist scared of society. What difference does it make? Comparisons are odious. Well, Smith, it just looked to me like this place was full of old rich farts, and the prices would be too high. I admit it. I'm scared of all this American wealth. I'm just an old bicou, and I got nothing to do with all this high standard of living, goddammit. I've been a poor guy all my life, and I can't get used to some things. Well, your weaknesses are admirable. I'll buy them. And we had a raving great dinner of baked potatoes and pork chops and salad and hot buns and blueberry pie and the works. We were so honestly hungry it wasn't funny, and it was honest. After dinner, we went into a liquor store where I bought a bottle of muscatel, and the old proprietor and his old fat buddy looked at us and said, where you boys been? Climbing Matterhorn out there, I said proudly. They only stared at us, gasping. But I felt great and bought a cigar and lit up and said, 12,000 feet, and we come down out of there with such an appetite and feeling so good that now this wine is going to hit us just right. The old men gaped. We were all sunburned and dirty and wild-looking, too. They didn't say anything. They thought we were crazy. We got in the car and drove back to San Francisco, drinking and laughing and telling long stories, and Morley really drove beautifully that night and wheeled us silently through the graying dawn streets of Berkeley as Jaffy and I sat dead to the world in the seats. At some point or other, I looked up like a little child and was told I was home, and staggered out of the car and went across the grass into the cottage and opened my blankets and curled up and slept till late the next afternoon, a completely dreamless, beautiful sleep. When I woke up the next day, the veins in my feet were all cleared. I had worked the blood clots right out of existence. I felt very happy.